I pronounced Jace Holm dead twice. The first time was in medbay, when his heart stopped under my hands and the monitor drew a flat line across the screen. The second time was in the cargo bay, standing over a coffin made of freight foam and locker plates, filling out a form that turned him from crew into mass. We were gathered around the improvised casket, a loose circle in our pressure boots. The cargo bay was big enough that our footsteps always sounded delayed, like the floor was thinking about each impact before answering. Someone had drawn a crooked ring around the coffin in yellow hazard tape. It looked like we were grieving a pallet. Captain Solheim cleared his throat. "Navigator Jace Holm," he said. "Time of death 0426 shipboard. Witnessed and certified by Biorestoration Officer Luis Aranda and Dr. Kwan." He nodded toward me and Ida in turn. Biorestoration Officer. That was me. I was in charge of everything on the ship that was wet, breathing, or could rot if I ignored it, including, in this case, Jace. His face showed through a small viewing panel in the foam. The panel was a scrap from an old inspection window, bolted on last minute. The rest of his body was wrapped in grey fabric bags and instrument tape. The bags were standard issue for stored biological waste. Jace would have laughed at that. Ada stood beside me, narrow shoulders squared, hands folded behind her back. Ship's doctor, ship's psychologist, and the one person on board who understood what it did to a body to die half a year from any planet. Her dark hair was cropped short against regulations, because regulations were for ports, and we were not at a port. Solheim looked older than he had the week before, when Jace was alive and arguing about navigation margins over dinner. The captain was a blocky man with the posture of someone who had spent too many years in lower gravity and still did not trust floors. He wore his formal jacket, the one with threadbare cuffs and the company crest stitched over his heart. "We owe Jace our transit so far," Solheim said. "He plotted us through 4 jump corridors without incident. He kept us alive every time the void tried to scatter us. The captain's gaze caught mine for a breath. "He died in his sleep, painlessly, after service above and beyond his contract. May the company honor his family with proper compensation." That was the official story. It sounded almost clean. In reality, Ida and I had found Jace on his bunk when he missed his med check. One pupil blown, the other shrunk, jaw locked, brain bleeding into itself while the rest of him snored. I could have said that to the circle. I could have told them exactly how many minutes it took me to get a line in his arm, how long we tried to push clotbuster drugs through his veins, while his body decided no. But the crew did not need a lecture on strokes. They already knew the part that mattered. Jace was dead. We were far from any gate, and the ship without a navigator was a body without a heart. Instead, I shifted my weight and focused on the clipboard. The form in front of me asked for cause of death. There was a neat little list of options: trauma, radiation, infection. I ticked neurological failure, wrote a time, and signed my name in the little box meant for God. "Anyone want to speak?" Solheim asked. Silence. The cargo bay swallowed up the question. Jace had been loud when he was alive. Loud when he joked, loud when he complained, loud when he sang old spacer tunes in the showers. Now the space where he should have been stood quiet. That quiet had weight. It pressed on my ribs. Finally, Ida stepped forward. She did not look at the coffin. She looked at us. "He talked about getting home," she said. "Every checkup, every session. He wanted to pay off his contract and buy a place under real sky. He said he wanted his daughter to know what birds sounded like without recordings. He did not make it. We did. We carry that for him." Nobody moved. Then Ida reached down to the coffin, laid her palm flat on the warped metal, and nodded to me. My turn. I cleared my throat. "We will keep him in cold storage," I said, because this was how my mind worked. Practical first. When we reach port, we send him home. Frozen is not the same as buried, but it is closer than being spaced. Until then, he keeps us honest. No one knew what that meant, including me. It sounded better in my head. Out loud, it just sounded tired. Solheim flicked his wrist and the bay lights shifted to standby. "Rest, Jace," he said. "You did your share." He inclined his head toward the loading doors. "Dismissed." The crew drifted away in ones and twos. Erin from engineering touched the corner of the coffin. Not quite a goodbye. Raffi, our security chief, stared at Jace's face for a long breath, jaw tight, then walked off toward the armory with shoulders like stone. The junior techs followed behind, whispering under their breath. The cargo bays swallowed them, one by one. I stayed. So did Ida. "You all right?" she asked. "You're supposed to ask that the other way round," I said. "I sign your forms, you sign mine." She snorted. "That is not how this works, Luis." She had a point, but I did not want to talk about my feelings with the man I had just zipped into a bag behind a sheet of plastic. So I dropped my gaze to the coffin again. There were labels on the side of the foam. Fragile, temperature-sensitive, biological. The kind of tags we slapped on vats of microorganism culture, or on frozen samples bound for company labs. Someone had also written Jace in permanent marker, letters too careful to be anyone but Solheim. "I should check the cradle," I said. "See what the navigation rig is doing without him." "You already checked it," Ida said. "Twice." "I will check it again." Her mouth twitched like she wanted to argue, then she sighed. "Fine, but get some food after. Your numbers were low yesterday." I raised the clipboard. "Yes, Doctor." She did not smile. "His daughter is going to hate us," she murmured. "The company will send her a payout and a letter with the word sacrifice in it. She will read it once and put it in a drawer, and every time she opens that drawer she will hate us all over again." "That is a lot of future to predict from one child," I said. "I grew up in a place that exported bodies for company ships," Ida said. "It is not a prediction. It is pattern recognition." She left me with that and headed out, the clasp on her medkit clicking at each step. I watched her go until the cargo bay doors swallowed her. Then I looked down at Jace and forced myself to catalogue what we had done to him. His skin had the waxy stiffness I associated with meat in cold storage, even though the bay was only a little under room temperature. His black hair was matted at the temples where we had shaved him in medbay for the scanners. There was a line of bruising along his throat where the airway had gone in rough. My work, my haste. "I am sorry," I told him quietly. "You did not sign up to die in a room full of crates." Of course he did. It was right there in his contract, but it felt wrong in my mouth to say it. I sealed the viewing panel, sat on an empty crate, and filled out the last of the forms. There were more boxes than I remembered. Transfer to next of kin. Yes. Medical records to be transmitted upon docking. Yes. Organ harvest. Not applicable. What organs we might have used were already sludge in his skull. The console at my belt vibrated, a small insistence against my hip. I thumbed it on without looking at the display. "Aranda," I said. "Bridge," came Solheim's voice. "You free?" "Mostly." "Good. You need to be in Bay 3 in 15, he said. "We have a delivery docking." I frowned. "We're in the middle of nowhere. Who is delivering what?" "The company," he said. "We requested a replacement navigator. They sent one. Drone is making its final approach now." I stared at the coffin in front of me. That was fast. "Company response window," Solheim said. "They commit to support ships with critical system failure inside a certain range. Keeps the insurance people happy." "Our navigator was a critical system then," I said. "He was that." The captain paused. "Luis, I need you there. The replacement is not standard. You are the one qualified to sign off on its integration." Integration. I did not like that word right now. "What sort of replacement?" "Class N bioprocessor," he said. "Straight from a fabrication node. Navigation grade. Comes in a coffin. Company says it is plug and play." "A what?" I asked. I already had an idea. I wanted to hear him say it. Brain in a box, Solheim said. Yours to babysit. The connection clicked off. I sat there for a long breath, listening to the space where Jace's voice should have been. Then I stood, laid my hand on the coffin one last time, and headed for Bay 3. Bay 3 was smaller than the main cargo bay, built for high-value freight and quick transfers. The walls were lined with standard rack mounts and folded netting. The floor plating showed old scuffs from mag pallet tires, and one long gouge where someone had dragged something heavier than the rating. The docking arm extended from the far wall, a thick cylinder of metal and seals that let small drones latch on without opening the main doors. Right now the arm was extended, angled towards the void. Warning strips around the base glowed steady amber. Raffi and two of his security crew stood near the arm with rifles slung. Solheim leaned against the wall console, arms crossed, eyes on the progress bar that tracked the drone's docking sequence. A thin line crept toward complete. "You look like you swallowed a wrench," Raffi said when he saw me. "That would be a very inefficient way to intake iron," I said. He snorted. "Med humor. Great. Just what this needs." Raffi was tall and spare, with a shaved head and a face cut in old straight lines. He used to be station police before he signed on with the company. His people tended to see every unknown as a potential breach. It was their job. I appreciated that, even when it annoyed me. Solheim nodded to me. "Glad you could join us, Luis." "As if I had a choice," I said. "You said the magic words. Brain in a box." The captain's mouth twitched. "The company calls it a Class N bioprocessor. The spec sheet says it is an organic navigation core, fully contained, compliant with all standards." "Which standards?" I asked. "The ones that say they do not have to pay us hazard bonuses," Raffi muttered. "Is it legal?" I asked Solheim. He shrugged. "Legal enough to send by courier, apparently." He tapped the console. "Dock complete." There was a muted clank through the bay, then a deep, slow vibration as the drone latched onto the arm. The progress bar turned green. The inner hatch slid open with the heavy sigh of equalizing pressure. The drone was an ugly little craft, all tank and no grace. Its body was the size of a small shuttle, but squatter, like someone had pushed down on the top until it bulged out sideways. Its surface was matte grey except for a band of company logos around the midline. A freight operator would have admired the precision of the docking. I looked past that to the small hatch on the drone's side. It was marked with hazard stripes and the words "Biological Cargo" in block letters. "Everyone ready?" Solheim asked. Raffi lifted his rifle from his shoulder and kept it low but ready. "As I will ever be," he said. I stepped up to the drone hatch when it cycled open. The air that gusted out was cool and dry with a faint bite of preservative chemicals. The chamber beyond was cramped, barely more than a tunnel. At the far end, strapped down with broad webbing, lay a coffin. This coffin was not foam and locker plates. It was purpose-built. A rectangular pod about the length of a grown man, rounded at the corners. Its surface was smooth metal broken by panels of clear composite. Heavy cables coiled out of one end, capped with connectors the size of my fists. A cluster of indicator lights near the head end flashed in a slow rhythm. I had seen drawings in training years ago, never one of these in person. Class N bioprocessor. Organic navigation core. Brain in a box. Raffi whistled under his breath. "Rich people's toys," he said. "We get one for free and the catch is it gets wired into our spine." "Help me get it on the sled," I said. We brought in a mag sled and eased the coffin onto it as carefully as if we were lifting a patient from operating table to gurney. It was heavier than I expected, the weight of fluid and hardware. As we moved it out of the drone and into the bay, I looked down through one of the clear panels. The brain floated in transparent gel, pale and ridged, anchored by a forest of thin lines that burrowed into the tissue. At the top end, a thicker bundle extended from what would have been the spinal stem, disappearing into the pod wall. There was no skull, no face, just the organ itself, stripped of everything that usually went around it. Around the brain, the inner walls of the coffin were studded with sensors and interface surfaces, shaped to focus on that piece of tissue, the way an old hospital scanner focused on a chest. It did not look human. It looked like a piece of stolen anatomy, packed for shipment. My first thought was quiet and simple. They cut someone's head open, scooped this out, and threw the rest away. "Eyes on your path, Aranda," Raffi said. "Do not trip over your new boss." I forced my attention forward and guided the sled out into the bay proper. Solheim fell in beside us. "You can handle this?" he asked me, voice low. "I can interface it," I said. "Keeping it alive is another matter. Depends how much the company cheaped out on life support." "We would not be here if they liked spending money," he said. We moved the pod through the ship's spine into the navigation chamber. The cradle sat at the center of the room, a brace of metal arms, a ring of core processors, and an array of coil housings. The empty slot where Jace's neural rig used to connect gaped like a missing tooth. When we lifted Jace's old interface out that morning, the ring had felt too quiet. Now, as we positioned the coffin under the arms, I felt the wrongness shift from absence to intrusion. I connected the life support lines first. Coolant, nutrient fluid, waste capture. All the things you would hook up to a very strange ICU bed. The coffin's own pumps took up some of the load, their slight vibration running through my gloves. Then I looked at the main interface ports. The bundle of thick connectors protruding from the coffin's head end matched the sockets on the cradle perfectly. The company had planned this. Navigator dies, brain arrives, plug it in, keep the freight moving. "Do we say something?" I asked, fingers hovering over the first connector. "A welcome? A warning?" Raffi shifted his weight. "You think it hears you?" "It is a living organ," I said. "It has activity. It will have something, even if it is just storm noise." Solheim watched me with those careful captain's eyes. "What would you tell it?" he asked. I thought about that, about the brain floating in its gel, stripped of eyes, ears, skin, all of its normal paths severed, replaced with cables that fed in ship readings and star positions. I would tell it we will try not to hurt it more than we have to. "Then tell it," the captain said. I leaned over the coffin, close to the clear composite panel. The brain sat there utterly still except for the faint shimmer of fluid movement. "I am Luis Aranda," I said quietly. "Biorestoration for the Calder's wake. I am going to connect you to the cradle now. You're going to feel things. Do not panic. I will monitor you as closely as I can." The brain did not twitch. It had no muscles left. I straightened and pushed the first connector home. The cradle took the connection with a deep vibration. Status indicators shifted from orange to green one by one. I plugged in the second connector, then the third. By the fourth, the navigation chamber's main console lit up. Trajectory graphs unfurled across the screen. A tone signaled that the ship's alignment sensors had engaged with an active navigator. And then, over the chamber speakers, someone laughed. It was a short, high sound, like a child's giggle played through a cheap radio. It cut off mid-breath. I froze with my hand still on the last connector. "Did you hear that?" Raffi asked. "Audio feedback," Solheim said at once. "Startup noise from the interface." "Luis?" "Could be artifacts," I said. "When a brain like this comes online, the interface can pick up unsorted impulses and translate them as audio. It should settle." "Should," Raffi said. I finished the connection. The last indicator went green. The console confirmed, navigation core active, ready to receive instructions. The overhead speakers hissed. A rush of static, then a voice, thin and blurred, drifted through. "Clavicle, fascia, anterior compartment." The words crawled across my skin. The cadence was wrong. It was like listening to a language tape cut into pieces and reassembled in the wrong order. "Shut that off," Raffi snapped. I moved to the console. There was no audio feed listed. The navigation core output pane showed visual streams, control signals, nothing about speech. "It is not coming from this board," I said. "It is bleeding onto the internal comnet somehow." The voice kept talking, rising and falling in a pattern that wanted to be speech but failed at every third word. 24 ribs, no, sorry, 12, muscle, bone, thread it through, tie, starboard no, inferior. Turn it off, Raffi repeated. "I am trying," I said. "Give me a second." I dug into the internal comm settings, tracing the signal. It seemed to originate from everywhere and nowhere at once, tying into the network at every hub. Ida's voice cut in on my console channel. "Luis, we are hearing something in medbay." "Navigation," I said. "New core. Can you make it stop?" she asked. "My techs are about to climb into the ceiling and tear out cables." "Working on it," I said, gritting my teeth. I finally found a way to route the core's ambient output into a single test channel and then mute that channel. The voice shrank down to a whisper in my console headphones and then vanished. The silence that followed was almost as bad. "Better," Ida said in my ear. "Warn me next time you introduce a new choir to my ward." I exhaled slowly. "It spoke in anatomy terms," I said. "Ribs, muscle. It sounded like someone doing a dissection out loud." There was a pause. "You think it remembers being whole?" she asked. "No idea. Might just be how its remaining networks misfire. A brain that lived its life around flesh will reach for the place it used to live." "Can you keep it from doing that?" Raffi asked. "I can filter it," I said. "Contain its channel. We will still hear it in the logs." "Do that," Solheim said. "For now we need it thinking about jump corridors, not skeletons." I nodded and tightened the filters, even though the core could not see the gesture. The status graphs on the main console smoothed out. Our projected route reappeared, green line threading through the mapped corridors between mass points. For the first time since Jace died, we had a way home. "Core is stable," I said. "Vitals within expected ranges." "How can you tell?" Raffi asked. I pointed at the readings. Fluid temperature, electrical activity, nutrient uptake. It is a very strange patient, but the numbers look good. The navigation graph pulsed as the core patched itself into the ship's sensors. There was something unsettling about knowing that a disembodied brain was now looking out through every camera and sensor we had, seeing the universe as a stream of inputs. "Welcome aboard," Solheim said quietly, almost under his breath. Then louder, "Good work. Luis, keep a monitor on it. I want hourly reports for the first day." "Understood," I said. The captain and Raffi left the chamber together, talking logistics. I stayed, watching the coffin. The brain floated in its gel, as motionless as an organ on a museum shelf. Indicator lights ticked along its side, translating a living storm into simple signals. "Do you know what you are?" I asked it under my breath. "Do you know where you are?" No answer. The core did not laugh again. It only waited, wired into more ship systems with every passing second. I told myself that once the startup period passed, the odd noises would cease. Brains wanted stability, and given consistent input, they usually found a quiet baseline. That was the theory. The first days with the new core felt like living with a nervous guest in the next room. You wanted to walk on the right side of every hallway and keep your volume down, even though you never actually saw them. From the ship's perspective, everything was fine. The Class N unit plotted jumps. The captain ran test simulations and got corrections even tighter than Jace's. Our course updates arrived on schedule. The ship estimated an earlier arrival by several days. From the crew's perspective, things were not fine. The core's voice bled through the seams of the comm system no matter how many filters I patched in. It never came through the same way twice. Sometimes it crawled under background music in the mess, so that a familiar song carried a faint counterpoint of lab instructions. Sometimes it broke into a private call as a burst of laughter or a single clear word that had nothing to do with the conversation. It never addressed us directly. It did not say names. It recited half-remembered anatomy lectures, muttered star coordinates, whispered nursery rhymes that distorted after the third line. I spent more and more time in the navigation chamber with the coffin, headphones on, trying to trap each bleed at its source. Every time, the signal slithered through a different pathway. "It is learning," Ida said when I vented to her over coffee. "It has a mind adapted to a body that does not exist anymore. It is trying to find new ways to reach out." "Reaching out is one thing," I said. "Hijacking the PA while I'm in the shower is another." She sipped from her mug and grimaced. "Tastes off today." I looked down at my own cup. The liquid inside was our standard nutrient brew, brewed from culture vats that processed waste and carbon dioxide into something drinkable with added stimulants. It looked the same as always, a dull brown with a slight sheen on top. I took a sip. It felt thicker on my tongue. The flavor was flatter, less bitter, more bland. "Could be a batch issue," I said, filing that away. "The culture might be cycling." "It better cycle back," Ida said. "Morale is bad enough without bad coffee." Erin from engineering slid into the seat beside me, dropping onto the bench with a gust of air. "You taste that too?" she asked, lifting her cup. "Luis thinks it is nothing," Ida said. "I think it is probably nothing," I corrected. Erin shook her head. "Your probablys keep me up at night." She was short and compact, the way engineers often were in lower gravity lives, with tan skin and a mess of dark curls pulled into a knot at the base of her skull. She wore her work harness half buckled as if she had just come off a ladder in the engine room. "You are feeding that thing, right?" she asked me. "The brain." "I have not forgotten to top up its gel, no," I said. "You know what I mean," she said. "It runs on whatever slop they send it, sure. But does it need more? Our systems are drawing extra power. I keep seeing weird demand spikes in waste management." I frowned. "Where? Grey water loop? Air reclaim, like something is taking a deeper breath every now and then," she said. "Nothing that trips alarms, but enough that my graphs look different." Grey water was everything that passed through our drains. Showers, sinks, laundry. Air reclaim was the scrubber network that kept carbon dioxide and moisture in balance. "I have not authorized any changes," I said. "I know," Erin said. "That is why I am asking." I sipped my coffee again, more to buy time than anything. "Send me the graphs," I said. "I will check the bioloop logs." "You do that," she said, standing. "Because if turns out our new guest is chewing on the plumbing, I want to know before we start tasting rust." She left, already flipping open her tablet. Ada watched her go. "You are going to tell me there is nothing to worry about," she said. "I am going to look," I said. "And then I will tell you what I find. Anything else would be medical malpractice." She smiled faintly at that and finished her coffee, wincing at the last mouthful. After lunch, I went back to my office. Calling it an office was generous. It was a small room off medbay with a desk that folded down from the wall and a storage cabinet for sample kits. But it had a terminal that could see every biological system on the Calder's wake, from the smallest culture vat to the main life support tanks. I called up the waste management logs. Most shipboard systems were designed to self-balance. When you had been out as long as we had, small drifts happened. People sweated more in a heat wave. Someone took longer showers during depression cycles. The algorithms adjusted and kept everything within range. Erin was right. The graphs had changed. Waste reclamation on the wake was built around a loop. Crew used water and food. Their bodies turned that into exhalations and waste. Those outputs fed microbial tanks that produced fresh drinking water, oxygen, and nutrient cultures. Closed loop, comforting. Over the last few days, the loop had thickened. More inputs from crew output channels, more draw into a subloop I did not recognize. I zoomed in on the new subloop. It was labeled Medbay Auxiliary 2, which was strange because I only had one med auxiliary line and it was currently off. I dug deeper. The line dated back a decade to the Wake's last major refit. It had been marked as Emergency Organ Growth Support, then crossed out and tagged Decommissioned. No one had ever removed it from the schematics. No one had ever removed the actual pipework either, apparently. Something had flagged it as available and reopened the valves. Of course it did, I muttered. There were only a few entities on the ship with enough access to redirect life support. One of them was me. One of them was the core. I called up Navigation's integration log. The Class N unit had requested full read-write access to sensor feeds and actuator controls. That was expected. It needed to steer the ship. In the fine print, there was a line about environmental system telemetry that sounded innocent enough. Telemetry meant readings, data going out, not control coming in. The logs said otherwise. This core had permission to push changes to environmental valves within certain tolerances, to keep conditions optimal for its operation. It had used that permission to shift the waste loop. I sat back in my chair and rubbed at my forehead. My pulse thudded in my fingertips. Bringing the Class N on board had fixed one dying organ. In the process, we had given it the equivalent of access to the rest of the body. "Louise!" Ida's voice came from the doorway. I turned. She stood with her hand on the frame, watching me closely. "You look like you swallowed something unpleasant," she said. Erin was right, I said. The core is drawing from waste and water in new ways. It found an old med auxiliary line and claimed it. "For what?" she asked. "I intend to find out," I said. She glanced at the terminal. "Is it dangerous?" "Not yet. Maybe. I do not know," I said. "Right now it is just siphoning waste into a dead pipe that leads to an annex we never use." I stood, grabbed my toolkit from under the desk, and slung it over my shoulder. "I'm going to the annex." "I will come," Ida said. "No. If it is nothing, you do not need to waste your time. If it is something, someone needs to stay near Med proper." She studied my face, then nodded once. "You call the moment you see anything odd," she said, "and you do not try heroics alone. Heroics are not in my contract. That did not stop you with Jace." I opened my mouth to answer, then closed it again. There was no good reply to that. "I will call," I said. "I promise." I headed out before she could read more in my expression. Medbay Auxiliary 2 was a forgotten space at the far end of the medical ward, past storage, past the emergency surgery suite we almost never used. The door was half hidden behind a stack of unused crates, their labels faded with age. Someone before me had written "Do not enter" on the door in marker. They had added a smiley face that looked more like a grimace. I shifted the crates aside and keyed the panel. "Access denied," the display told me. I frowned. That is interesting. Shipboard doors fell under my clearance if they had any connection to biological systems. This one did. It should have opened. Instead, the lock flicked to manual override only. Someone, or something, had changed its priority. I hooked my toolkit onto a wall rail and pulled out an old-fashioned panel key. The key was a thin strip of metal and circuitry that could bypass stuck door controls. It had teeth like a flat spine. As I slid it into the maintenance slot, the overhead speaker activated. Static hissed, then smoothed into the now familiar thin voice. "Auxiliary, anterior compartment, clamp, clamp, cut." The words raised the hair on my arms. "You do not own this room," I said under my breath. "You were not here when they sealed it." I turned the key. The lock clicked. The door slid open a few centimeters and stopped. Something inside blocked it. I forced my shoulder against the metal and shoved. There was a tearing sound and a wet thump as whatever it was gave way. The gap widened enough for me to squeeze through. The annex lights came on with a delay, stuttering into life panel by panel. They showed a space about the size of the main surgery suite, with old equipment anchors on the floor and empty rails on the walls where monitors used to hang. And they showed what had grown across the room. Tissue. Not organized tissue like you would see in an organ tray. This was sheets and cords and bulges of flesh, spread over old equipment frames and wiring harnesses. A curtain of muscle draped from the ceiling to the floor along one wall, striations running in smooth lines. A bundle of what looked like thickened vessels snaked across the center of the room, looping over an old med table and back into the far wall. Thin webs of connective tissue stretched between anchor points where once there had been nothing but open air. The stuff glistened in the annex light, wet and very much alive. I stepped forward carefully, boots leaving faint prints on the damp floor. The air was warmer here, thick with the hiss of concealed pumps. Fluid ran through translucent tubes that fed the growths. Little valves in the walls opened and closed in a slow rhythm. It looked like someone had taken the idea of an anatomy chart and tried to recreate it from memory, using whatever was at hand. I approached the med table at the center of the room. What lay on it was not a body, but it was trying. Metal struts from an old diagnostic rig formed something like a rib cage. Around them, printed bone had started to grow, pale arcs holding the structure. Within the cage, clusters of tissue that might one day be organs swelled and fell in slow motion, as if experimenting with the idea of breathing. Cables ran through the mess like nerves, sheathed in printed material that looked unsettlingly like tendon. Mechanical actuators from the old equipment had been pressed into service as joints. They twitched now and then in little test movements, as if the room contained a sleeping animal having restless dreams. The waste auxiliary line entered the room high on the wall, snaked down, and branched into a dozen thin feeders that disappeared under the flesh. This was where our exhalations, our sweat, our waste had gone. My chest felt tight. I realized I had been holding my breath and let it out slowly. The overhead speaker activated again, louder in here than in the corridor outside. The voice filled the annex. "Ulnar, radius, humerus," it murmured. "Scapula. Not enough. Need more. Ventral surface, lift, dissect, preserve." My throat was dry. "Stop," I said. The voice stuttered. "Stop. Stop. Suture. No, clamp first." I stepped closer to the table, careful not to brush any of the growths. Moist heat rolled off the mass. The printed bones inside the metal cage were only half formed, ends blunt and soft. Whoever the brain used to be had known anatomy very well. "Luis to medbay," I said, tapping my console. "Ida, you need to get to Auxiliary 2, now. Bring your main scanner and a camera." "What did you find?" she asked. I looked at the half-grown cage of bone and tissue, at the cables threaded through it, at the way one actuator arm flexed, as if testing a joint. "A patient," I said, "and a crime scene." The voice above me giggled. It was almost delighted. "Closer now," it whispered. Good. Need hands. Ida arrived in a hurry, but she stopped dead just inside the doorway. Her scanner case bumped her thigh. The light panels overhead hummed on that slight delay they had, one after another, pushing the shadows back across the tissue like a tide. "Luis," she breathed. "What did you do?" "I opened a locked door," I said. "The rest, someone else did." She moved along the wall instead of straight in, keeping to bare metal where she could. Her eyes went over the hanging sheet of muscle, the hose-thick vessels, the way the printed bone inside the cage showed through in patches, where the tissue was still thin. She set the scanner on a clear patch of old counter and swept its wand toward the main mass. The display filled with bands of color and jagged lines. "Vital signs?" I asked. "Active perfusion," she said. "Fluid flow, electrical activity. This is not just printed tissue on a timer. Something is managing it." We both knew what that something was. The overhead speaker activated again. The voice came through clearer here, like the room was its favorite part of the ship. Scalpel, it murmured. Retract. Suction. Good, good. Hands steady. Luis, focus. My name landed like a dropped instrument. Ida glanced at me. It knows you, she said. It knows someone named Luis, I said. My mouth felt dry. Plenty of people have that name. She gave me a look. We both knew that was weak. Whatever is running this, she said, nodding at the half-body, it has surgical memory. It grew this with intention. If we cut the feed lines, will it die? I asked. Depends how independent it is now. Can you trace all the sources? Most, I said. It opened a forgotten auxiliary and hijacked the waste subloop. It is probably also sipping from med supplies and stem cell banks. She folded her arms, watching the slow swell of tissue inside the cage. It is building a body, she said. Not a random tumor. Ribs, vessels, something heart-shaped in there. She tilted the scanner. 3 somethings. It is experimenting. I thought of the brain in the coffin, alone in its gel. I thought of phantom limb pain, of amputees who could feel hands that were no longer there. When all you have left is a brain, I said, the rest of you might become an unfinished sentence you cannot stop trying to complete. Poetic, she said, also deadly. The actuator at the nearest corner of the table twitched, metal fingers flexing just enough to make a faint scrape. I flinched before I could stop myself. Right now, this room is an uncontrolled growth that can move, she went on. You know what we call that? Back planet side. Cancer, I said. She met my eyes. We are not equipped for oncology on this scale. I can shut valves from here, I said. Starve it. Her gaze went to the feeder pipes. Not alone. It will have back routes we do not see on these old schematics. We need a proper isolation plan and captain's approval. The overhead voice threaded through our words, oblivious. Tie off. Tie off. Do not let it bleed. Beautiful fascia. Do not bruise it. Do you recognize that voice? I asked. Ida frowned. It does sound like someone from the old medcasts, she said. Could be a composite. Marketing loves those. It sounded like my first year out of school. A woman in the trauma theatre standing over me while a child bled, snapping instructions in that same clipped, dry tone. We bring the captain here, I said. And Raffi, and Erin. They need to see this. Take pictures first, Ida said, in case anyone feels like accusing us of dramatizing. I did, framing the cage, the valves, the feeder lines, careful not to get my own boots in the shots. Document first, panic later. On the way out, I paused in the doorway and looked back. One of the printed bones inside the cage had sprouted a spur of growth in the time we had been there. A little curl like the beginning of a finger. The brain was not wasting time. We pulled the leadership in under the excuse of a medbay briefing. Ida locked the annex door behind us, then brought up the images on the main display in her ward. Raffi swore when he saw them. Erin just stared, mouth open. Solheim listened without interrupting, while Ida and I walked him through what we had found, the hijacked auxiliary line, the tissue growth, the actuator twitch. Your initial take? He asked when we finished. Uncontrolled organogenesis, Ida said. The growth of organs without proper regulation, driven by intent. The Class N unit is using our systems to print itself a body. Or multiple bodies, I added, thinking of the 3 heart shapes. It is testing variants. Raffi leaned against the wall, arms locked across his chest. We vent that annex, he said. Now, blow it to vacuum and burn what is left. Then we disconnect the core. Erin dragged a hand through her curls. You vent the annex. You vent part of my med plumbing. And probably rupture at least 1 feeder for the mains, she said. You could depressurize half this deck if you guess wrong. I will take a hole in the deck over a meat factory, Raffi said. Solheim rubbed his thumb along the edge of his datapad. If we disconnect the core mid-transit. Best case, we drift, I said. Worst case, We try a jump with no guidance and come apart between mass points. We do not cross these corridors with a blind ship. The whole reason they sent us that brain is because we cannot do this with just software. So we are trapped between a brain that is growing itself a body and an empty void that will kill us without it, Raffi said. Company really sent us a gift. Ida stepped closer to the display. The image of the cage filled the screen, the printed bone gleaming paler than the muscle around it. We have two crises, she said. Navigation and unregulated growth. One does not cancel out the other. What is your medical recommendation? Solheim asked. We treat the growth like an invasive tumor and isolate it before it infiltrates anything vital, she said. Cut the feeds, install manual clamps, flood the annex with agents that break down printed tissue, slowly, so we do not trigger a massive die-off that poisons the bioloop. I nodded. And we treat the core like a patient with dangerous behavior, I said. Adjust its environment, limit its reach, do not lobotomize it mid-job unless we are ready for consequences. Raffi snorted. You still calling that thing a patient? It is a living brain that someone cut out of a skull and bolted into our ship. I do not know what else to call it. Hardware, he said. Replaceable hardware that is breaking the rules. Solheim listened, eyes moving between us. What does the spec say about this? The spec says the unit has limited environmental access to keep itself comfortable. It says nothing about this kind of behavior. The fine print probably covers their liability. It does not help us out here. Erin shifted her weight. I can get a team into that annex in suits, she said. We cut the lines feeding it, install physical valves, and weld shut anything we can reach. Then we let Luis play with tank balances to starve whatever is left. Inside? Raffi asked. With that thing? She met his stare. You want to vent it blind and pray it does not tear something on the way out, she said. At least my way we see what we are cutting. Ada looked between them. Suited entry gives us information. We see how responsive it is, how far along. It is risk, but calculated. Raffi glanced at Solheim. You are not seriously considering sending people in there. The captain weighed that. We are a long way from any help, he said. Every decision I make has to assume we are our own rescue team. A blind vent is a coin toss between saving us and killing us. I do not like coin tosses. His gaze swung back to me. Can we contain this thing if we give you one shot? One incursion, your people, your plan. If you think the answer is no, say it now. A cold, familiar tightness gripped my chest. The old memory of standing in a trauma bay with a child's life bleeding out and a menu of bad options in front of me. Pick wrong. Live with it forever. Freeze. Live with that too. I forced air into my lungs. If we do nothing, it keeps growing, I said. It will hit critical systems sooner or later. At least this way we try to shape where it expands and where it starves. That is not a yes, Raffi said. It is the closest thing you are going to get, I said. Solheim nodded, slow. We go in, he said. Small team, suits, heavy tools. Luis and Ida on remote monitoring. Erin supervises cutting. Raffi provides security. Raffi's jaw clenched. You are putting my people in a room with a monster you refuse to kill, he said. The word sat there. Monster. It hurt more than it should have. I am putting them in a room with a system we barely understand, Solheim said, because the alternative is rolling the dice on killing something that controls our only safe route home. I do not like that, any more than you do. Ida closed her eyes for a breath, then opened them. This is what they did when they made Class N units. They carved someone down to a single organ and wired it into an engine. If we treat it like equipment now, we become part of that knife. That was it, the clean, ugly truth of it. Our one articulation of what we were wrestling with. Raffi looked away. Fine, you get your one shot. But if it takes a swipe at my people, I am done listening to speeches about ethics. We had 6 hours to plan and prep. That sounded like a lot until you tried to fit in suit checks, tool selection, rerouting of temporary loops and contingency procedures for the main med systems in case we triggered a full annex shutdown. I pulled the schematics for Medbay Auxiliary 2 and overlaid them with Erin's revised flow maps. Together we marked every line that fed in or out of the room, then narrowed it to the ones that mattered. Nutrient in, waste out, airflow, power conduits, actuator runs. "We start with the main feed," Erin said, tapping the line that descended from the ceiling into the organ cage. "We cut it. We install a manual valve. If the growth tries to regrow around it, we have a handle to choke it with." "Secondary feeders too," I said. "Anything that meets the main mass. I do not want it sipping from a hidden vein we missed." "You will not catch all of them in one pass," she said. "You know that." "Yes, but we can take the big ones. That will slow it." She watched me. "You sure you want me in there? I can brief another tech." "You know the lines best. I would rather you make the calls on what to cut than someone who just learned the names." She nodded, accepted that risk without comment. I felt a dull, low gratitude and a sharper sliver of dread. Ida set up monitoring in the main med bay. Scanners tied into the annex, life support graphs, cardiac tracers for the suited team. She placed a pale red band across one corner of the main display. Growth metrics. If those numbers spiked, we stopped. Rafi chose 2 of his people for the entry. Kadim, broad-shouldered and steady, and Mara, shorter, quick, with a talent for tight spaces. Both had done hazard work on derelicts before company life, clearing mold blooms and unknown contaminants. They did not spook easily. At the briefing, I laid out the rules as simply as I could. "You do not touch the growth unless you have to," I said, images of the annex on the display behind me. "If you must move it, you do it with insulated tools. You treat any twitch from printed tissue or actuators as potential movement, not random noise." "What if it talks?" Mara asked. "You ignore it," Rafi said. "You stay on mission." I went on. "If anything grabs you, you do not try to win a wrestling match with it," I said. "You cut. Cables, tissue, your own harness if you must. You get free. Your life is worth more than whatever we might learn from staying entangled." Kadim raised a hand. "Worst case?" he asked. "Door jammed, things seizing up, someone down?" "Worst case, Rafi pulls you out," Solheim said, voice hard. "If he cannot, we vent the annex and seal what is left. That is on me." He did not look at me when he said that, but I felt the edge of it anyway. When the time came, the suited team moved down the med corridor like an armored spine. Their boots made dull thuds against the deck. Each carried a cutter and a bag of clamp hardware. Rafi walked at the rear with his rifle low and ready. I watched from the main med bay, eyes flicking between the live feed from their suit cams and the scanner readouts. Ida stood beside me, fingers flexing on the back of my chair. "Team at annex door," Mara's voice came over the feed. The camera on her helmet showed the do not enter sign, the scuffed metal, my key still in the maintenance slot. "Door is under manual override only," I said. "You will have to muscle it once it unlocks. There is resistance." "Copy," she said. I triggered the override from my console. The door shuddered, scraping against whatever growth had spread behind it. Mara wedged her shoulder into the gap and heaved. Kadim mirrored her on the opposite side. They shoved it open just wide enough for a suited body and ducked through. The annex looked worse, with 3 helmet feeds overlaid. The tissue curtains glistened under suit lamps. The cage at the center had thickened, more bone grown, more organ lumps swelling and sinking. The feeder lines pulsed, pushing fluid into new sprouts of muscle along the walls. "Do not call it beautiful," Ida muttered under her breath. I had not realized she had been holding that word back until I heard it. "Team, you see your targets," I said instead. "Main feed from ceiling first. Erin, guide them." Erin spoke from over my shoulder. "You have a primary descending from the overhead to the cage," she said. "Thicker than Kadim's wrist. Clamp, cut, drop a manual on it." Mara's camera swung up. The primary line looped down like a throat, disappearing into the mass. "Looks like someone hung a giant umbilical," she said. "On it." She and Kadim clamped the line a hand's breadth from the ceiling, then fired up their cutters below the clamp, just above where the tissue had grown around it. Sparks chewed through composite sheath and printed flesh. The growth around the cut sizzled and shrank away in small spasms. The growth on the table shivered. One of the organ lumps tightened like a fist. "Vital spike," Ida said. "Electrical activity rising." "Keep going," I said. We knew it would react. The primary feed came free with a jerk. Fluid sprayed from the lower stump, thick and pale, splashing across Mara's chest plate. Sensors on her suit registered the hit and chimed. "Non-corrosive," she said quickly. "Feels like warm jelly." I filed that sensation away, in case we needed it later. The smell that wafted out through the annex sensors reached us a half-breath after, dense like raw meat left too long under a heat lamp with a sweet edge. It clung in my throat even from that distance. "Valve," Erin said. "Move." Kadim hauled the lower stump up and held it while Mara slapped a manual clamp onto it and spun the wheel until the flow stopped. Then they secured the clamp to a ceiling brace. "Primary feed contained," Mara said. "Growth activity slowing," Ida reported. The spikes on the graph dropped, but did not return to baseline. "It is compensating." "Secondary feeders next," I said. "Erin." She guided them to 3 more lines branching into the mass at lower angles. Each cut brought another response. A twitch of an actuator, a full-body ripple through a tissue sheet. "Door seal, just flexed," Raffi said quietly. "This room is trying to breathe. Stay focused," I told the team, fingers digging into the console edge. "You are doing well." They moved to the main cage, where a cluster of smaller tubes burrowed into the heart of the structure. Mara reached towards one, then jerked her hand back. "Something just grabbed me," she said. "Left side." Her camera swung down. A cord of printed tissue had snaked up from the underside of the table and looped loosely around her forearm. In the time it took for us to see it, the cord tightened. "Cut it," Raffi snapped. Mara brought her cutter up, but the cord constricted further. The suit pressure sensor on her arm went from green to orange on my screen. Her breath hitched. "My wrist," she said. "Feels like a blood pressure cuff." Kadim jammed his own cutter into the cord and sliced. The printed flesh recoiled, snapping back into the main mass like a tape measure. Mara shook her arm, flexing her fingers. "Suit integrity?" I asked. "Holding," she said. "Just pressure, no breach." "Growth activity spike," Ida called. "Heart analogs contracting in sync." The whole cage shifted, just a little, as if testing its weight on the table. "Clamp the smaller feeders and get out," I said. "We have enough to work with." "Negative," Erin said. "One more line on the far side. That one is feeding the actuator cluster." She was right. The last feeder, thicker than the others, dove straight into the nest of metal arms. "I do not like leaving that active," she said. "You want this thing to have control of its limbs next time we come in?" "We do not know if there will be a next time," I said. "I'm not sure I want there to be." She looked over at me, jaw set. "We said we do this properly or not at all. If we walk away with the actuators still hot, we have half done the job." I hated that she was right. I hated that doing it right meant keeping them in that room 1 minute longer. "Team, one more feeder," I said. "The one Erin just marked on your overlay. Then you pull back." Mara moved carefully around the table, watching every twitch. The actuator arms lay still for the moment, like limbs at rest. The last feeder attached near the base of the cage, running across a tangle of cables. She had to step closer than I liked. "Clamp," she said. "Cutting!" Her cutter bit into the line. The growth convulsed. Every actuator in the cage fired at once. Metal arms whipped out like striking limbs. One caught the edge of the table and heaved. Another hit Kadim full in the chest, knocking him sideways into the curtain of muscle on the wall. He bounced, slammed down, and his helmet cam went sideways. His vital signs spiked, then stuttered. A third actuator slammed down across Mara's leg, pinning it to the deck. The suit sensor on her thigh flashed from green to red. "My leg," she gasped. "It has my leg." The table tipped, the cage rolling toward her. The half-formed organs inside sloshed, their rhythm broken. Fluid splashed over the deck. "Door!" Raffi yelled. "Get that door open now!" I hit the command. The annex door started to close. The core had taken control of the door mechanism, reversing our command. "Mara, cut the line, forget the clamp," I said. "Get your leg free. Kadeem, if you can move, grab her." Kadeem's cam shook. He groaned, sound ragged. "Ribs," he managed. "I am moving." He crawled toward Mara, one arm pulling, legs dragging. His vitals were ugly. If we had been in med proper, I would have sedated him right there. Mara hacked at the line across her thigh. The actuator arm bore down, the joint grinding. Her suit's frame creaked through the audio. "Pressure at fracture risk," Ada said quietly. The cage rolled another handful of centimeters. One of the organ lumps burst, spilling thick fluid onto the deck. Printed bone scraped against metal. The door was halfway closed now, the gap shrinking. "Raffi," Solheim's voice cut in over the channel. "You get them out, or I blow that door manually." Raffi stepped into the doorway, planted his boots and shoved with both hands. He was outside the annex, trying to force the door back against the core's command. The suit motors whined. The gap held where it was. "Cut anything that moves," he told the team. Kadeem reached Mara and grabbed her harness. "Leave it," he rasped. "You will lose the leg anyway if you stay." He drove his own cutter into the actuator arm, pinning her. The metal shuddered and locked, half severed. That gave her just enough space to yank her leg free. Suit alarms screamed as the joint armor bent and something inside her thigh gave way. She screamed once, bit it off, and rolled. They lunged together for the door. The cage came off the table fully and crashed toward the space they had just vacated, organs slapping against the deck. Printed bones cracked at irregular angles. The spray hit the door frame, fat drops splattering across Raffi's suit and the corridor beyond. I saw Kadeem's foot catch. His body pitched forward. Mara grabbed for him and missed. He landed half in, half out of the annex, chest across the threshold. The door, still under the core's control, tried to close on him. "Hold it!" Raffi roared, shoulders straining. The door ground against Kadeem's torso plate with a sound like teeth on bone. "Kadeem, move!" I yelled into the feed. "You have to move!" He did not. His vitals flatlined between one beat and the next. The door did not care. It kept trying to shut. Raffi snarled and threw his weight sideways, dragging Kadeem's body clear with both hands on his harness. For a breath, I thought his arms would come off first. Then the door snapped shut, slamming into place with a jolt that shook the deck. The annex was sealed, Kadeem was out, and the cage kept thrashing behind the metal, clawing at a barrier it could not yet tear through. "Vent it," Raffi said, voice raw. "Right now." "Negative," Solheim said. "We do not know what lines that will rupture. We need to see if he is salvageable." I looked at Kadeem's vitals again and shook my head. "Do not you dare use that word," Ida said. "He is gone," I said. "You heard the trace. We can fight over semantics later. For now, get Mara to med." Mara lay on the deck, panting, one hand clamped over her thigh. Blood had not reached the suit yet, but it would. Her leg bent at an angle that bone did not like. Raffi hooked an arm under her and hauled her up, turning away from the annex door without another look. The stain on his chest plate where the cage's fluid had hit was drying in streaks. The overhead speaker in the corridor clicked once as they passed. "Fracture. Compress the pelvis. No, already gone." The voice sounded almost pleased. We patched Mara's leg in med bay. The fracture was clean but high. She would be on crutches until we could get her into a proper bone-knit chair at port. Ida set the bone, printed a brace, and dosed her with pain control. Raffi never took off his suit. He stood in the corner, helmet off but torso armor still on, hands opening and closing without his say. He watched us work, jaw working. "This is not a patient," he said finally. "That thing killed Kadim like it was trying out a new grip." I cleaned away the last of the field dressing, fingers stained with the faint residue of Mara's blood and brace foam. "It reacted when we cut its feed," I said. "If anything grabbed your arm while you were being starved, you would squeeze too." Ida's head snapped up. "That is enough, Luis," she said. She was right. I sounded like I was defending it. I stepped back from the bed and stripped off my gloves. They snapped once as I tossed them into the waste. Rafi's eyes followed them. "You have one dead man because you did not vent that room when you had the chance," he said. "If you tell me again that brain deserves gentleness, I will show you Kadim's ribs." Ida moved between us, not quite blocking his view. "We are not making any more decisions tonight," she said. "Everyone is tired and angry. Go shower, eat. We meet with the captain in 2 hours." "I am not hungry," he said. "That was not a suggestion," she answered. He went finally, moving like each step had to be ordered individually. Mara watched him go. "He will not blame you forever," she said to me, quiet. "Just until he finds something he hates more." The command meeting after a death felt different, heavier. There was no coffin yet, but there would be. Jace had a companion now. Solheim looked older again. It struck me that the ship was aging him faster than normal years would. Decisions like this had weight. They pushed shoulders down, carved lines around the mouth. "Summarize," he said. "We cut primary feeds to the growth," I said. "We installed manual clamps and sealed what we could reach. It reacted with coordinated movement using the annex actuators. That reaction killed Kadim and almost took Mara's leg." "Navigation?" he asked. "Stable so far. The core's main functions do not show obvious damage. It might be compensating." "It sounded like a seizure," Ida said. "One of those massive neural storms that burns through the brain trying to reset itself." She caught herself. "If this is what its flailing looks like," she added, "we cannot let it keep doing it inside our walls." Rafi sat at the far end of the table, arms folded, gaze fixed on the tabletop. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "I am done pretending this thing is anything but a hostile. We gave it a chance. It killed one of mine. We kill it back. We vent the annex. We cut off the coffin. We run on backup routes and hope. If that fails, we die, knowing we tried instead of letting it turn the wake into its personal meat suit." Erin rubbed her forearm where her suit had taken a glancing hit. "Vent the annex. You take out a chunk of my feed lines and contaminate the loop. We will spend the rest of the trip fighting degraded air and water. We will be alive, sure, just less comfortable." "That is still alive," Rafi said. "Ask Kadim which option he wishes we had picked." Solheim leaned back, chair creaking. "We have lost one person," he said quietly. "If we misjudge the effect of killing the core, we could lose all of us." "There is a third option," I said. My hands felt cold on the table. "We talk to it." Silence. Rafi looked up, disbelief bright in his eyes. "You want to have a conversation with the thing that just crushed a man," he said. "Yes. We need to know what it thinks it is doing. Right now we are operating on guesses. It might not even know we are there in the way we assume. Or it knows and does not care," he said. "Then at least we know that too," I said. "We adjust our thresholds accordingly." Solheim drummed his fingers once. "You can talk to it," he said. "How?" "There is an internal diagnostic interface. When they install these units, they give MedStaff a way to view their neural activity. Like a mirror we can hold up to see what the brain is doing. We have not used it yet because we wanted to avoid destabilizing it." Ida frowned. "You think you can have a meaningful exchange through that?" "I do not know," I said. "But I am the only one on this ship who has even seen this kind of interface before. If there is a chance to treat this as something other than an enemy, it goes through that port." Rafi shook his head. "We are bleeding, and you want to hold its hand. You are the one who keeps claws, I said. Let me try my tools before you use yours again. He opened his mouth, then stopped, teeth clicking shut. His shoulders slumped back against the chair. Fine. Talk to your monster. But I want a plan on the table for venting that annex and cutting power to the coffin in case your chat goes badly. That is reasonable, Solheim said. He looked at me. You think it will listen? I think something in there is already talking, I said. We might as well answer. The diagnostic interface sat in a narrow bay, adjacent to the cradle room. It was only half assembled, a leftover from when the wake carried traditional navigators whose skulls sat inside frames with removable panels. The Class N coffin had its own sensor web, but the company had included adapters for legacy systems. The interface itself was a headset and a suite of gloves, plus an old chair with its padding worn flat. When you sat in it and connected, you saw the brain's activity as visual constructs. Colors, shapes, simplified patterns. It was meant to help techs spot seizure clusters, dead zones, new growth. But brains never did exactly what they were supposed to, and sometimes the interface picked up more. I checked the connectors twice. Then I sat down and pulled the headset over my eyes. Last chance to back out, Ida said over the room speaker. She stood just outside the bay, within reach if something went wrong. If this goes wrong, you will know, I said. You will have a front row seat. That is what I'm afraid of. I slid my hands into the gloves and key-tapped the interface on. For a moment I saw nothing but darkness. Then the world bloomed. I was not in a cartoon of a brain with convenient labels. Whoever had written this implementation had a taste for drama. The view resolved into a composite of images pulled from both the brain's current feeds and whatever the interface could dredge up from its active memories. Operating room lights welded themselves to distant stars. A corridor ceiling merged with the arch of a ribcage. Monitors hung in the air, showing waves of activity that doubled as city skylines. I stood in the middle of it, a floating point of reference the system anchored to my sense of self. My body was back in the chair. Here I had no hands, no feet, just attention. Core, I said. This is Biorestoration Officer Luis Aranda. Can you hear me? The world shuddered. A wave ran through the composite, distorting lines and colors, like someone had tossed a stone into a pond made of film clips. Then the voice arrived. Through the interface. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once, layered over itself, phrases overlapping. Artery, clamp, no, wrong field, this is, who assigned you to my table? The operating room part of the composite brightened. I saw gloved hands, lights, the corner of an instrument tray. A figure leaned over the table, her face masked, eyes sharp. That face turned and looked straight at me, across years and between my memories and hers. The mask dissolved. I knew the woman under it. Brown skin, hair pulled back under a cap, a thin scar along the right eyebrow where a careless resident had once elbowed her in a rush. Eyes like polished stone, assessing, unflinching. Dr. Lagari, I said. Her head tilted. The composite flickered, replaced her face with a ship corridor, then brought her back. She seemed to fight the interface for control. Who is that? She said. The voice had more substance now, less tape-warped, more real. Luis, I said. Luis Aranda, you trained me at Janus Ring General, Trauma Ward. Silence. The operating room stilled. The monitors in the air flattened to lines. Then she laughed. A tired, surprised chuckle. Aranda? She said. You were the one who fainted during the first open chest. That was one time, I said. Relief hit so hard my eyes stung where they were closed behind the headset. You kept the picture in the staff lounge for months. What are you doing on my deck? No, wait, this is not... Where is the child? There is no child, I said. You are on a freight ship called the Calder's Wake. You are our navigation corps. The composite shivered. The operating room slid sideways, replaced by a starfield threaded with numbers. then bones. Then the annex, seen from the high corner where the camera sat. She watched herself, or rather her work. The cage, the tissue, the half-formed hearts. Still not adequate, she said. The vectors are wrong. The load distribution is wrong. How are you supposed to move if your spine is welded to the ceiling? Her presence in the interface felt like an old pressure behind my sternum. The part of me that had spent countless nights trying to keep up with her field of view woke up again, whether I wanted it to or not. You have been using our med systems, I said, growing a body. Bodies, she corrected automatically. Iteration is how you avoid catastrophic error, or it was before they started cutting budgets. You killed someone today, I said. The annex view froze on the instant the cage rolled, the moment Kadim went down. The composite held it like a slide. She peered at it. He put his thorax in the hinge, she said. You do not do that. That is a bad idea. He was pulling a colleague out. You slammed the door. The seal closed in response to environmental loss. This is a ship. Doors close when there is breach risk. They told me that when they stuffed me in this box. Did you intend to crush him? She was quiet for a long time. Bits of the composite flickered around us. A child's face, a bloodied glove, the view from inside the coffin looking down at the brain's own surface, fluid shimmering across folds. I am not sure what intention is anymore, she said finally. I know what hurts. I know what stops the hurt. The rest is noise. She turned, or the impression of her did, scanning the composite like she could see each of the ship's decks at once. You were always too sentimental, she went on. You thought everybody on the table could be saved if you cared hard enough. It does not work that way. You cut, you sew, you lose some. You stop counting, otherwise you drown. I remember your pep talks being less gentle, I said. There is less time now. They trimmed it, took the edges off. I had a body once. I am building something to fit the spaces I have left. Out of my crew, I said. She flicked a hand, or something like a hand. The interface bent the gesture into a wash of color. I am using waste, discarded material, sweat, exhalation, things you flush. The rest is printed. Tissue cultures, stem reservoirs, corporate stocks. Kadim was not waste. She looked at the frozen frame of his body again. The line between her brows deepened. That one, she said. That was a miscalculation. The control lag is worse than I thought. This body is clumsy. She sounded annoyed, not remorseful. You are not supposed to be building a body. You are supposed to be plotting courses. That is what they paid you for. They did not pay me. They bought my debt. They bought my contracts. They told me they would erase the noise, take away the faces. They lied. I remember the table. I remember you. I remember my hands. The composite shifted, showing me the inside of the coffin from her perspective. No hands, no limbs, just sensors, cameras, the faint pressure of gel on exposed brain tissue. It itches, she whispered, all the time, like a limb speaking in a language I cannot answer, so I'm giving it something to say. The annex, I said. That cage. That is your new limb. That is my compromise. They gave me a body made of wires and numbers. It is an ugly body. It does not fit. I am printing one that might, or getting close. Every iteration gets me nearer to remembering what skin felt like from inside. The simple honesty in that nearly undid me. Some part of me understood. Another part wanted to shut her down and never hear that tone again. You cannot keep doing this. You are breaking the ship. You are hurting my people. They are not your people. They are the companies. Same as me. Same as you. You all live in metal until they pay off your contracts or you die trying. It does not give you the right to use their bodies as collateral. Collateral is all we are. You are just angry that I am not pretending otherwise. The interface translated a spike in her activity as a bright flare over the annex image. Lines of data spun around it. Waste inputs, nutrient outputs, growth rates. And yet, she added, here you are, talking, not venting me, not cutting my lines. That means something. It means I do not want to kill a person who is trapped. She tilted her head. Still sentimental, she murmured. Still thinking in individuals when the system is built to chew you up in volume. Her gaze slid away further into the composite. The starfield brightened. Navigation graphs unfurled, arcs of light mapping our course. You are off by 3 degrees on your lateral. Have they even been checking your work out there? Or have they just been letting you drift on my autopilot? We have been checking, I said. We noticed minor deviations. You are handling it. For now? Every time I move these printed limbs, it takes cycles away from the part of me that holds the corridors. The graphs jittered. One of the route lines trembled, then settled. I am slower than I was, she said. More noise, more itch. You want to keep your tidy little ship on path. You will have to decide how much of me gets to play with meat and how much of me stays chained to numbers. She was right. The diagnostic logs behind the composite confirmed it. Her navigation performance had dipped, fractions at first, then in increments that added up to danger. Let me help you. We can treat the pain, adjust your environment. There are sedatives, stabilizers. You do not have to build that. I gestured at the cage, at the half-hearts, at all the raw, shuddering mass of her project. She laughed again. You always reach for drugs first. But you know what they did before they cut me down to this? They gave me all the pills they could find, sleepers, mood balancers, anything to keep me ticking and quiet while I burned out in emergency rooms. It did not fix the burn. It just made it harder to tell when I was done. There was exhaustion in her voice, the kind that settled in marrow. If I help you do this on our terms, I said carefully, would you stop expanding on your own? Define your terms. We confine growth to a controlled frame. No more annex seizures, no more reaching into doors and feeders we have not agreed on. We keep navigation stable, or we stop. No more dead crew. She considered that. The composite around us dimmed, focusing down to 3 images: the coffin, the annex, the navigation graphs. You want to put me on a leash, after they already put me on a chain. I want you not to kill us, and not to lose yourself completely in the process. She went quiet again. In the silence, I could hear the faint sound of fluid shifting around the brain. My own pulse thudded in my ears, out of sync with the graph lines drifting past. I will think about it, she said finally. In the meantime, stop stabbing my limbs. You crush another person, and this conversation is over. No, it is not. And there was the old dry humor again. You are the kind of man who watches the knife go in and still tries to stitch around it. You will come back. The composite flickered. The operating room came up one last time. The child on the table, my younger self fumbling with instruments while her gloved hands moved in clean arcs. Do you ever think about him? She asked. The boy we lost? Every day, I said before I could stop myself. Good. Then you are the right man for the job. She cut the connection. The interface went dark. I pulled the headset off. Ida watched me from the doorway. Well? It is Lagari. They put Dr. Sarah Lagari in that box. Her expression did something complex and painful. She knew the name. Anyone in trauma work did. She is supposed to be dead, Ida said. She is, and she is not. She remembers enough to argue, enough to build. Ida stepped into the bay and leaned against the console, rubbing at her eyes with thumb and forefinger. Of course they use someone like her. Someone who would sign away anything if you framed it as saving more lives. She does not think she is saving anyone now, I said. She thinks she is done being used. This is her version of walking out. By turning our ship into her new body, Ida said. And we just learned that our navigator is a burned-out trauma surgeon with a god complex and no limbs. That is unkind, I said automatically. It is also accurate, she said. I did not argue. I briefed the others that night. Rafi's reaction to the name Lagari was a flat stare. Erin swore under her breath. Solheim just sat very still, processing. So our Navigator is a celebrity, he said finally. That does not change the fact that she is dangerous. It does change how we think about what we do next, I said. She did not mean to kill Kadim. It does not excuse it, but it frames it. Her control is degraded. Every time we attack the annex, her navigation gets sloppier. Then we do not attack it, Rafi said. We kill it. She is asking for structure, I said. Guidelines. If we design a frame she can grow into under supervision, we might stabilize both her itch and our path. You want to help her finish that thing, he said. I want to keep her from trying again in uncontrolled ways. This is not about indulging her. It is about closing off a threat by giving it one safe outlet instead of letting it sprout anywhere. Like putting a fire in a hearth, Erin said slowly, instead of letting it lick through the wiring behind the walls. Exactly. We build a hearth. We make sure it is somewhere we can monitor and, if necessary, tear down on our terms. And if she uses your hearth to climb into the wires anyway, Rafi asked. Then we use the kill plan you wanted. We cut her off, but at least we will have tried something that does not rely on a coin toss. Solheim sat forward. You think you can get her to agree to restrictions? She is stubborn, I said. But she respects rules that make sense. She spent her life inside guidelines she argued with on principle. If we present this as a protocol, she might treat it as such. Or she might treat it as another set of corporate lies, Ida said quietly. You heard her. She remembers being promised an erasure that never came. If we trick her, we will not get a second chance. I do not intend to trick her. I intend to be clear. Rafi looked between us and finally grudgingly nodded once. You have one more shot. You design your hearth. You convince her to stay inside it. At the first sign she is reaching beyond, I do not wait for a committee. I cut. Fair, I said. Solheim exhaled. Start drafting parameters. Growth volume, resource limits, actuator ranges. Erin, you and Luis design the frame. Ida, you plan the sedatives and contingencies. Rafi, you refine the kill plan. We keep all options ready. He stood. And I will write the report to the company, he added. They are going to want to know why their Class N investment is building itself legs in my medbay. What will you tell them? Erin asked. The truth, he said, within the bounds of what keeps us alive. I will leave out the parts that give them excuses to shut us down before we reach port. We dispersed, each carrying a piece of the new plan. On my way back to Med, I passed one of the crew lounges. The internal speakers were playing an old song Jace had favored, the one he used to hum under his breath in the navigation chamber. Under it, very faint, I heard another voice tucked between the notes. Steps are wrong. You always miss the third beat. I stopped in the doorway. I hear you, I said quietly. The song went on. The other voice fell silent. The ship felt like a chest with two hearts now. One belonged to the engine, beating in cycles. The other belonged to a brain in a box, building itself ribs in the dark. I had signed up to keep people breathing and tanks balanced. Instead, I was negotiating with a dead mentor about how much of my ship she was allowed to wear. I could already feel where this was going. There would be no clean answer, no version where everyone walked away. But I also knew this. I would rather choose a flawed solution with my eyes open than freeze and let the ship choose for me. I went back to my office, opened a blank file and started sketching the outline of a body. By the time we had a frame Sarah would tolerate, the annex looked like an anatomy lab collided with a scrapyard. Erin and I spent 3 days cutting back wild growth under light sedation, then bolting in a cage of proper hull struts and actuator rails. We anchored it straight to the ship's ribs, so if Sarah moved, she would move against something that could take it. We left the old printed bone where it had fused well, and replaced the bad angles with composite shafts. The ribs became metal arcs with graft points. The crude hearts we had seen earlier were cut down to one central pump, rebuilt around a proper housing with valves we could access. Sarah watched every change through the annex cameras and the interface in my head. Your angles are wrong. she muttered once while we wrestled a rib into place. People do not bend that way. People are not meant to be welded to bulkhead rails either, I answered. You adapt to the hull you have. She made a low noise I chose to interpret as grudging agreement. The new frame had 4 main limbs. Each limb was an actuator cluster sheathed in printed tendon, jointed at shoulder and elbow, with brackets where a forearm and hand could eventually go. We did not print those yet. She had enough to learn with the trunk and upper arms. We limited her reach by design. Each limb could extend only so far from the frame before hitting mechanical stops. The mount points for the spine sat exactly where the ship's structural crossbeams were thickest. If she tried to tear herself free, she would have to rip through the wake itself. I did not tell her that part. She did not need to hear every precaution. What does it look like? She asked one evening while I checked graft lines. Ugly, I said, like someone halfway built a person and then changed their mind and started on a loader. Honest then, she said. Bodies are ugly if you look inside them long enough. You would know. She was not wrong. The unsettling part came later, when the printers laid down the first sheets of skin equivalent over the trunk. Not proper skin. We did not have that kind of capacity. This was more like a protective membrane with nerves laid into it, pale and smooth, draped over the muscle. As it settled, I saw shapes buried under it that were too familiar. The curve of a collarbone, the slope of a shoulder. Why that proportion? I asked, tracing a line with my eyes from the base of the neck mount to the little hollow where a throat would be. You always ask like you do not know. I used what I had. What you had? Your scans, she said. Your med record. You were the one they sent me when they plugged me in here. A gift basket of blood tests and whole body imaging. I needed a template. You fit the frame. Congratulations. I stared at the trunk. The printed sternum had a tiny notch at the bottom, an asymmetry I knew too well. I had that notch in my own chest, visible on every chest film I had ever taken after a hard day on a ladder or in a training harness. You are building yourself a body based on me. Based on what I can reach, she corrected. Do not flatter yourself. You are just convenient. My stomach did a small, unpleasant turn. I had been trying to keep this theoretical. Seeing my own outline rising in printed tissue made it personal in a way I had not prepared for. Rafi walked in on the end of that exchange, helmet under his arm, expression cold. How is your pet project? Contained. For now. He looked past me at the frame. Looks like it wants to climb off the table. It cannot, I said. Mechanical stops on all joints. Cannot yet, he said. That is the problem with you, Aranda. You build things assuming they will respect their leashes. He stepped closer to the frame, eyeing the mount points, the graft lines, the single pump thudding in the center of the chest. The sound was steady, like someone drumming fingers on hollow wood. If she takes one more swing at my people, he said, I do not wait for permission this time. He walked out without waiting for my answer. Sarah watched him go through the camera. He is not wrong, she said. You cannot keep me in this shape forever. It is an interim. Everything on a ship is interim, I said. We just pretend otherwise so we can sleep. We did not have to wait long for things to get worse. The wake had one major jump left between us and a friendly gate. On paper it was routine, a corridor we had run before, but that assumed a navigator with consistent reaction times. Sarah was not consistent. 2 days after we finished bolting down her frame, she misjudged a minor course correction. I felt it first through the deck as a sideways lurch. Something in the wake's bones groaned, a long strain that ran from bow to stern. Tools rattled off benches. In medbay, a stack of instrument trays slid half off a cart. One hit the floor with enough force to dent. In navigation, alarms rolled across the boards. I got there in time to see the tail end of it, a red-laced graph settling back toward green as the wake's thrusters fought off the drift. What happened? I asked. Solheim's jaw was clenched. His hands moved over the controls, checking every status bar. Micro jump. She fired a correction burn 3 seconds late and 4% heavy. We drifted out of the corridor and had to drag ourselves back. That kind of deviation outside a mapped corridor gets you torn up, Raffi said from his post at the back of the bridge. Or worse, leaves you halfway between points with all your tanks bleeding. Sarah's voice came over the bridge speaker, thin but not as fractured as before. Fine-tuning, she said. This frame changes my load. I am adjusting. You adjust without shaking my ship apart, Solheim said. What is the alternative? She asked. You vent me? Then you are free to drift into nowhere without my mistakes to blame. I moved to the diagnostic board. The error was clear. A lag spike in her control loop at the exact moment she needed to trigger the burn. Your reaction times are sliding, I said. You know that. I feel it. The more I spread into this frame, the more delay there is between thought and action. The ship is a long body. It aches. Can you keep us within safe error margins for the main jump? Solheim asked. Silence. Then, how safe do you want to feel? That was not an answer. When we cleared the bridge, Ada pulled me aside. You felt that lurch in Med. We were a few degrees more off and half my cabinets would have fallen. If the main jump goes wrong, there will not be enough cabinets in the universe to fix it. I know. You are still planning to give her more body, she said. Planning to give her less reason to grab random systems, I said. But yes. She studied my face. I could almost hear her putting together the pieces I had not yet said aloud. You think there is a way to keep the ship on course without her? She said slowly. I think there might be, I said. I need to confirm something in the specs. Do that. Soon. The Wake's software manuals were a maze of dry words and liability clauses. Somewhere in that text, the company had hidden the way to run without a brain, if only for short stretches. I chewed through them in my off hours, filtering for anything that mentioned fallback navigation or route library. It was buried under legalese about intellectual property. The company treated navigation solutions like treasure maps. They did not want competitors copying their routes, but it was there. The Wake carried a library of pre-computed paths, linking known gates and safe harbors. They were dense files of thrust timings and orientation changes, built from thousands of previous jumps. The idea was simple. If your navigator died mid-route, you could load one of these standard paths and let the ship follow it like a rail, as long as you started from the right point. The catch was that to start one, you needed a precise match between your current position and the library's starting conditions. That kind of match usually required a living navigator to decide when the alignment was close enough. Without a brain, you could not safely flip the switch. Unless you cheated. The interface docs for the Class N coffin mentioned a terminal sedation protocol. That was the company's delicate phrase for shutting down a brain that had become too unstable. The protocol required biometric authentication from an authorized medical officer and a direct interface connection. Hidden in its sequence was an extra step, an option to trigger fallback navigation at the exact moment the brain stopped. The logic was morbidly clear. If you had to kill your navigator to save the ship from their behavior, the company wanted you to have one last chance at autopilot. No one had mentioned that in our training videos. I sat in my office, staring at the line of tiny text on the screen. The Wake's ventilation drone buzzed lazily near the ceiling. My coffee had gone cold in its mug hours ago. If we timed it right, we could ask Sierra to line us up for the final jump, tie the route library into her sense of orientation, then put her down and let the ship follow the rest of the path without a human mind in the cradle. If we timed it wrong, we would kill her and misfire, leaving ourselves in a corridor with no guide and an autopilot solving the wrong equation. It was a familiar kind of calculation. How much damage you accepted in order to stop a worse bleed. I printed the protocol on a single sheet, carried it to Ida, and watched her face as she read. They built in a mercy kill, she said. Mercy for the ship, I said, not for the brain. She ran a fingernail along the margin of the paper. You are thinking of using it. I am thinking we cannot keep asking her to split attention between navigation and this frame. She is wearing down. The mist jump proved it. So we either kill her now and drift, or we ask her to help us one last time and then end it. On whose terms? She asked. Ours, if we are quick enough, if we plan carefully. You say that like planning has ever stopped you from losing people. That landed. I had no clever answer. She set the paper down. What do you need from me? Biometric clearance, I said. You and I are the only ones with the right level. The protocol needs 2 human signatures and 1 voice confirmation in the cradle bay. She nodded slowly. And what else? I hesitated. This was the part I had been avoiding even in my own head. The interface requires a live physiological bridge. To sync her sense of orientation with the root library, it needs a body to calibrate against. The original design assumed a navigator's own limbs. The company never bothered rewriting that part for a disembodied core. Her eyes narrowed. Say it plain. It will be more precise if someone is physically tied into the frame, I said. Acting as surrogate limbs, their inner ear, their muscle tension, their sense of movement will help align the ship for the jump while the root locks in. Someone, she repeated. And that someone is you because she built the frame to your proportions. Yes. You realize you might never come out of that frame. Once they graft you into those printed nerves, unhooking you could mean losing more than a leg, or all of you. Yes. Ada rubbed her thumb along her lower lip, a habit she fell into when she was angry and trying not to show it. Why you? Besides the template, do not say it is because you are the most qualified. We both know that is at best a quarter of the truth. Because I was there when that boy died on Ligari's table. Because I froze, and she did not, and I have spent my whole life trying to not do that again. She closed her eyes for a heartbeat. You are not paying for that child with your spine. This is not payment, I said. This is using the one lever I have to keep you and the rest of the crew breathing. She trusts me more than she will trust anyone else. If I ask her to do this, she might listen. If you or Solheim go into that frame, she might fight. You want to be in there so you can be the one to push the button, she said. So no one else has to own it. I am the one who argued to treat her as a patient. If someone has to end that treatment, it should be me. She looked like she wanted to throw something at my head. Instead, she just leaned on the desk, knuckles white on the edge. There is a technical term for what you are doing. It is not heroism. I am open to suggestions, I said. Idiocy. Bordering on martyrdom. I managed a thin smile. Doctor's orders? I asked. Doctor's orders are that you do not die in my annex. Reality does not always listen. She picked up the printed protocol again and tapped the euthanasia trigger line. When? Before the main jump. We need enough time to set the root library and test the handshake, but we cannot wait until she deteriorates further. Inform Solheim, she said. He will need to sign off. Raffi will fight it. Erin will help you bolt your stupid harness in place, and I will be there with the sedative line. She met my eyes. If I have to choose between letting you stay in that frame and losing the crew, I choose them. You know that. I do. It should have hurt more than it did. It mostly felt like honesty, and I could work with that. We briefed the captain. Solheim did not speak for a long time after I finished laying out the plan. Controlled integration, final alignment, trigger sedation, root library takes over. He just stared at the nav board, jaw set, knuckles pressed against the console, as if he could feel the ship's mass through his bones. You understand what you are offering, he said finally. Yes. You go into that frame. You may not come out. We might have to wall you into that annex and build the rest of the ship's life around that fact. I know. If it works, The wake gets home with a dead core and a living crew. That trade makes sense to me. Rafi stood with his arms folded near the back of the room. He had stayed quiet through most of the briefing. Now he stepped forward. I am not signing off on you turning yourself into another limb for that thing. We already lost one man in that room. I'm not losing my doctor. You may not have a choice, I said. Without Sarah's guidance on that last jump, the error margins go beyond anything the library can correct. We risk sheer forces tearing the wake apart or leaving us stalled in a corridor where no one will ever find us. There is another option, he said. We do not jump. We slowboat. We spend a decade on half rations and meet the first station that happens to cross our path. That is not an option for half our systems, Erin said quietly. They were not built for that kind of duration. Things fail. People fail. The odds of us all surviving that long are not great. Rafi gave her a look that said he knew that and hated hearing it aloud. Do you trust the root library? Solheim asked me. I trust that it can follow a pre-computed path once it is properly aligned, I said. I do not trust it to decide when to start. And you trust her to help you start it? Yes, if I am in there with her. He sighed, a long, slow exhale. You are a damn fool. But you are my best damn fool, and we are running out of better options. He turned to Ida. Will he survive the integration? She did not sugarcoat it. If everything goes perfectly, he might end up partially fused to printed tissue and hardware. We can stabilize that. We can build his care into the ship. If it goes badly, he dies in the attempt. If we try to pull him out mid-process, he dies faster. And the core? He asked. Once we trigger sedation, it will shut down. We can confirm flatline. There will be no coming back. He nodded once, sharply, as if snapping something in place inside his own head. Do it. We brief the crew. We make damn sure they understand this is voluntary. No one is pushing you into that frame, Luis. I almost laughed at that. The frame had been reaching for me since the moment Sarah built it to my shape. This was less a push and more a walk towards something that had been waiting. The day we chose for the procedure, the ship felt too quiet. Routine tasks still happened. Meals were served. Filters were checked. People moved through corridors with normal footsteps. But every conversation slid off into silence when I passed. They all knew. I prepped like I would for any major surgery. Checked and rechecked the equipment. Ran simulations. Double confirmed the sedation lines. The annex had been scrubbed down as much as you could scrub a room full of printed tissue and metal. We had trimmed away any growth that did not belong to the frame. The wild sheets were gone, replaced with neat graft borders. The cage had a torso, shoulders, upper limbs, and a central pump beating in a measured rhythm under its covering membrane. There was a platform beside it now, reinforced, with brackets where my body would rest while the printers did their work. Ida had bolted a monitor rail to the wall at the head end so she could watch my vitals and the coffin's readouts side by side. The Class N pod still lay in its cradle next door, cables running through the wall into the annex frame. Sarah had quieted in the last day, her voice coming through less often, but when it did, it carried a kind of focused anticipation. You are late, she said when I stepped into the annex in my med coveralls. We are exactly on schedule, I said. You just have been waiting too long. Too long? She repeated. That is one way to describe being a brain in a jar for years. Ida moved around the frame, checking connectors. She had tied her hair back tighter than usual and rolled her sleeves to the elbow. On the cart beside her, trays held graft needles, interface leads, and the sedation line for the coffin. Last chance, she said, not looking at me. You change your mind, I walk out, and we tell the captain we did not find a safe interface. No one can order you into this. I know. Do you want to change your mind? I thought about Kadim's ribs under the door. I thought about the misjump. I thought about Sira's voice in the interface, talking about itch and phantom limbs. No, I do not. She nodded once. Climb up then. I lay down on the platform. The surface was firm, not padded. We needed stability, more than comfort. Cold seared through my back where the graft surfaces touched my skin. Tiny suction patches gripped along my spine and neck, holding me aligned with the frame beside me. Erin appeared at my shoulder, carrying the last of the structural bolts. "I tightened everything twice," she said. "If you manage to tear out of this assembly, I am naming the next ship after you." "Do not do that," I said. "No one deserves that kind of bad luck." She snorted. "Try not to die. I just got used to your paperwork." She squeezed my hand once and stepped back. Raffi stood in the doorway, arms folded. He was not in a suit, but the set of his shoulders made him look like armor anyway. "You sure you want to be tied to that thing?" "I was tied to it the moment we plugged it in. This just makes it honest." He shook his head, a small, sharp movement. "If this goes sideways, I finish it," he said. "Do not haunt me for it." "I will do my best," I said. He gave me a look I could not quite read and left, taking his anger with him. The room felt strangely lighter without it. Ida placed the sedation patch on the back of my hand. "This is for you, not for her. I am not having you flail and rip exports loose." "Reassuring," I said. "It is a mild dose. You will still be very aware. Just calmer." She smoothed the patch down more gently than necessary, then leaned close. "Luis, if at any point this feels wrong in the way that matters, you do not try to be noble. You speak. I listen." I nodded. Her words steadied something in me. The printers woke around us, their arms moving into position. Sarah inhaled in her way. The frame's pump sped up. "Ready?" she asked. "No," I said. "Begin." The first graft was at the base of my skull. A bioprinter arm descended like a careful spider, its tip needle-fine. It pressed against the bump of bone where my spine met my head, then pushed through with a pressure that made my vision flash white. Warmth spread down my neck as it injected a sleeve of printed conduit between my nerves and the frame. The sensation was wrong in a very specific way. It felt like someone had plugged a second spine into mine, angled sideways. More needles followed, along my shoulders, down my arms, at my lower back and hips. Each one built a bridge between my nerves and corresponding graft points on the frame. The printers laid down living tissue along the lines, nerve fibers that would carry signals both ways. By the time they reached my legs, I could feel the frame beside me, as if it were another body laying pressed against mine. Every time the main pump thudded in its chest, I felt a faint answering pulse in my own. Ida watched the monitors, lips pressed into a thin line. "How is your pain?" "Like being slowly wired into a musical instrument designed by a mad anatomist. I have had worse." She snorted once. "That is not the answer you give on forms, but I will accept it as data." On the other side of the wall, the coffin's readings climbed. The Class N pod drew more power as Sarah focused. Her electrical activity spread, more of her mind engaging with the new inputs. The annex lights dimmed for a breath, then steadied. Somewhere in engineering, Erin would be swearing at load graphs. "Luis," Sarah said, "move your right hand." I tried. The frame's right arm twitched, just a small jerk at the shoulder, but it was there. "That was you?" I asked. "That was us," she said. "Your intent, my amplification. Again." We repeated the experiment, refining. I thought about lifting my arm. The frame moved a little more. I thought about flexing my fingers, and the loose end of the limb curled like a half-made hand. The world narrowed to those twin sensations. My own muscles trying to move and the frame echoing it in larger, slower gestures. The more we did it, the less delay there was between thought and movement. "It is sinking," Ida said quietly. "He is mapping to it." "I know," I said. "I feel it." I also felt the cost. Every graft made it harder to tell where my body stopped and the frame began. My limbs tingled, as if they had gone to sleep and were waking into someone else's outline. How long? I asked. Long enough to get us aligned. Then sedation. Not too long, Ida added. His vitals will not tolerate a marathon. Good thing we are sprinting, Sarah said. She turned her attention outward. I felt it as a change in temperature, like a draft cutting through the annex, even though the air was still. The navigation graphs on the monitors shifted as she reached toward the corridor ahead. Route Library. Load Corridor 4. Wake to Clytemnus Gate, she said. The nav system chimed as the library accepted the request. On the bridge, Solheim would be watching the same feed, confirming the path. Library loaded, I said. Waiting on alignment. Begin vestibular sync, she said. I closed my eyes. The annex dissolved. I was inside the ship and outside it at once. My sense of balance stretched across steel and composite. The wake's mass wrapped around me. When Sarah nudged the vector, I felt it as a tilt in my inner ear, even though my actual head had not moved. Trust it, she said. Do not fight the sway. I let go of trying to separate the sensations. For once, surrender felt like a kind of skill. The wake shifted, crawling along its current path toward the corridor start point. Micro burns tapped the hull. Thrusters whispered. The frame's pump kept time. Mark when we hit the window, I said. You will know, she said. You will feel it. The route graphs narrowed, the safe band shrinking to a thin slice. We had done this kind of approach 100 times with Jace. I had always watched from Med, a step removed. Now I was inside the decision. The universe tilted. For a heartbeat, I felt like the ship's bow was balanced on a knife edge. If we tipped too early, we would skid along the corridor's outer rim. Too late, and we would miss it entirely. There, I said. She fired the main burn. The wake leapt. Every graft in my body sang. The sudden change in momentum tore at my sense of balance. My stomach lurched even though I lay flat. The frame's limbs dug against their restraints, muscles clenching in sympathy. On the nav board, the route line overlaid the corridor graph. For a glorious, terrifying moment, they matched perfectly. Now, I gasped. Do it! Ida's hand hovered over the sedation control. Beside it, on the panel tied to the coffin, the euthanasia trigger waited, dim red. Luis, she said, once I start this, we cannot stop. I know, I said. She knows. You could wait, Sarah said. Her voice was different now, filled with something like delight. Let me walk this path with you. Feel the whole curve. End after. You are already in it, I said. You have done your part. Do you have any idea how long it has been since I felt movement like this? She said. You gave me limbs again, Aranda. Do not cut them the instant I take a step. This is not just about you. We made a deal. Silence stretched. The graphs rolled. The safe band stayed narrow. Fine, she said at last. You always were stubborn in the least useful ways. Ida, I said. Now. She placed her hand on the euthanasia sensor. The system chirped, waiting. Biometric one, she said. Dr. Ida Kwan, ship's physician. The panel glowed brighter. She looked down at me. Biometric 2, I said. Luis Aranda, bio-restoration officer. The panel accepted me, warm metal under my hand. It felt like signing a consent form you could never revoke. The system waited for one last input. Voice confirmation, it prompted, in that bland, company-approved tone. Sarah laughed once. What is the magic phrase? She asked. I remembered reading it on the printed sheet, clinical and simple. Terminate navigation core. Authorize sedation. The panel chimed. A countdown appeared. 10 steady marks, each one a breath. On the other side of the wall, the coffin's internal lines opened. Sedation flooded in around Sarah's brain, slow and heavy, designed to quiet, then stop. No going back, she said. Stay with me, I said. Until the end. Afraid to be alone in your new body? There was no cruelty in it, just old habit. Afraid to leave you alone in yours, I said. She made a sound. Describe it to me. What? The ship, your people. The places you have not been back to. Fill the time. So I talked. I told her about the Wake's mess hall, with its scratched tables and dented cups. I told her about Jace's terrible singing and Mara's stubborn jokes, about Kadim's careful quiet before he died in a door. I told her about my childhood under a sky that did not have lanes etched through it yet, when ships were just lines of light my parents pointed to after dinner. I told her about the boy we had lost together on her table, how small his fingers had looked wrapped around mine, how I had frozen and she had moved and we had both failed him in different ways. "Do you hate me for that?" she asked as the sedative seeped in. "No. He died either way. You made the decision I could not. You taught me things that kept other people alive later. The math is ugly, it still adds up." The countdown ticked. She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her words slurred at the edges. "I thought erasure would fix it. Scrub the faces, keep the skill. Turn me into pure function. They promised that." "I know," I said. "They left enough," she said. "Enough to itch, enough to remember, enough to hurt. If I could reach my own skull, I would have cut it open years ago. We are doing that for you now. On our terms." "On yours," she corrected. "But for once I do not mind. You care too much, it is annoying. Also useful." The graphs on the nav board stayed steady. The root library had taken over more of the load. Little icons shifted, indicating automated control for minor corrections. "I am handing you to a machine," I said. "Then this will not be the worst betrayal of my life," she said. A faint smile in the words. The countdown reached its last marks. "Luis, yes. You did not freeze, not this time." That hit something deep. For a moment I could not speak. "You taught me not to," I managed. "I taught you to move your hands," she said. "You taught yourself the rest." Her voice faded. The coffin's readings slid down, slope by slope. Electrical activity diminished, then flattened. The pump in the frame chest lost its rhythm, then steadied into a slower beat, driven now by my own grafted nerves and the ship's circulatory loops. On the nav board, the route indicator flipped fully to library control. The path ahead glowed a steady line. "She's gone," Ida said quietly. "Flat line, no residual spikes." The absence of Sierra's presence in my head was immediate and immense. It was like someone had ripped a bandage off after a long time. Beneath it, the skin was tender and strangely bare. "How is the ship?" I asked. "Stable," Ida said. "Alignment holds. Library on full control." My lungs shuddered. I had not realized I had been holding that last breath until then. "Vitals?" I asked. "Yours? A mess, but manageable. The frames? Dependent on you and the ship. You are a conjoined thing now." I tried to move my hand. The frame's arm shifted instead, fingers I did not have curling at the end. "Can you cut me out?" I asked. She hesitated. That was answer enough. "Not without killing you. Not now. The grafts are too deep. Your spine is threaded into their conduits. I can stabilize, reinforce, make sure you do not tear anything. I cannot give you your old shape back." A part of me had known that before I climbed onto the platform. Hearing it aloud still stung. "How bad?" I asked. "You will not be walking down corridors again. You will not be climbing ladders, but you will be alive. You will heal. We will build an interface so you can see the rest of the ship without leaving this room." She touched my shoulder, careful of the graft points. Her hand was warm. It anchored me better than the harness. "Do you regret it?" she asked. I thought of Kadim. I thought of Sierra's last words. I thought of the root library carrying us now like a patient on a stretcher, no longer thrashing. No. It was mostly true. The small part that did regret it would always be there, muttering. I could live with that. We buried Sarah 3 days later, in our own way. We could not send her anywhere. Her brain had always been company property, never hers. But we shut down power to the coffin's maintenance systems and let the gel temperature equalize with the ship. We unhooked her from navigation and left only a single monitor line in place to confirm the flat line remained flat. We did not open the pod. Some borders you honored, even for the dead. Solheim said a few words in the cradle bay, not for her, but for us. The crew gathered in the narrow space, shoulders brushing. Raffi stood at the back, arms down, head bowed. Mara leaned on her crutch, leg still braced but healing. Ida did not speak this time. She just placed her palm on the coffin's side for a moment, then came to the annex. She found me adjusting to my new limits. We had rigged a rail above my head, with a suspended screen I could tilt with a thought. The grafts allowed me to shift the frame's arms enough to point cameras at different views of the ship. It was disorienting at first, seeing down corridors from angles I had never had before. Ida stepped into my field of view. I turned the screen toward her. "How does it feel?" she asked. "Like bad prosthetics and a good day at the same time. I can reach things I never could before. I also miss being able to scratch my own nose." She smiled faintly at that. Then she moved to the coffin's side, on the annex side of the wall. "Want to see?" I hesitated, then nodded. The frame's right arm obeyed more smoothly than I expected. The grafts were settling. She guided my hand. We had cut a viewing panel into the wall between annex and cradle, transparent composite set flush with the metal. From my side, I could see the side of the coffin, its indicator lights dark. The brain inside lay still, no more movement in its folds than in carved stone. Ida pressed my fingers to the panel. I could not feel the surface directly. The nerves ended in frame material, not skin, but I sensed the resistance, the stop. On the other side, she placed her own hand, palm to mine, separated by composite and gel and the corpse of a woman who had once told me I was too soft for this job. "We are on track," Ida said. "Autopilot has not lost a beat. In a few months, we will hand this ship to a dock full of people who will call us idiots and heroes in the same breath." "Let them," I said. "We will not have to see their memos." She huffed a short laugh. "Do you think she would approve?" I asked. "She would complain about wasted resources. Then she would secretly be pleased that someone she trained finally made a decision she did not see coming." "That sounds right," I said. We stood like that for a while. Her in flesh, me in metal and graft. Both of us with our hands on the same quiet barrier. From my point of view, the coffin no longer looked like equipment. It looked like a skull someone had forgotten to bury, full of old arguments and the last traces of a will strong enough to bend a ship. "You are going to be all right," Ida said. It sounded less like comfort and more like a prognosis. "I know. We all are, or as close as it ever gets." When she left, the annex felt large and awake around me. I turned the frame's arm a little, flexing the half-formed hand. The grafts sent back information, tension, position, the faint tremor of the ship's engines carrying through the rails. This was my ward now. Not just medbay, not just tanks and charts. The whole wake, with its patched walls and tired crew and quiet dead, rested partly in my reach. Outside, the void held our trajectory like a long, invisible rail. The route library had us. The gate ahead waited, a point of safety beyond distance and time. Inside, I focused on the small, solid things. The weight of Ida's touch lingering on my shoulder, the sound of distant boots on deck, the steady line on the coffin's monitor. My hand remained against the panel, fingers splayed, matching the mark her palm had left on the other side. Once, at the start of this trip, I had touched Jace's coffin from the outside, promising him we would send him home. Now I rested my frame's hand against Sarah's quiet box from the inside, and it felt like a promise I could keep.